I'm Afshin Rattansi. We're going underground after a repeated aerial bombardment of Syria by Israel, armed by Britain, EU nations and the United States. Coming up on the show, we ask a former Middle East-based MI6 agent whether a Joe Biden presidency signals a new road to Damascus and the renewal of ISIS, Al-Qaeda and UK, US, EU attempts at regime change in Syria, even during a global pandemic, and what bloodshed to expect from Obama-era officials accused of facilitating civilian drone killing and the destruction of Libya, Africa's richest per capita country. And as an inquiry launches in Romania after a coronavirus intensive care unit sets fire and kills 10, we investigate Oscar-tipped film Collective with its echoes of alleged incendiary profit-driven corruption, for which an inquiry continues here in London into the Grenfell fire in the poorest area of one of the richest in the world. All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground. The football star Diego Maradona being mourned today around the world not only once said, "In my heart I am Palestinian," he declared the motives of Western powers in Syria was to destroy a secular nation. Hours before he died, warplanes from Israel armed by Britain, EU nations and the USA bombed the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, Damascus. Joining me now from Rome is the Conflict Forum's Alistair Crook, who cut his teeth at MI6 and since the siege of Bethlehem has dedicated his life to de-escalating violence. Alistair, thanks so much for coming on Going Underground. I think it's a first time, although you've been on shows of mine before. Just how do you explain the fact that during a pandemic, we know Antonio Guterres said he wanted a worldwide ceasefire. Why was there this barrage of aerial bombardment from the Israeli Air Force on Damascus? And this happening as we hear of Netanyahu going to Saudi Arabia, denied by the Saudis, and Antony Blinken, this old Obama-era official, being selected by Joe Biden to be the next Secretary of State?
Well, I think, first of all, the main aim in this at the moment, and the main aim that Netanyahu had, I think, with his visit to Saudi Arabia to meet MBS, the Crown Prince, the first priority for really for Israel is to get Iran put at the top of the agenda for the administration. This incoming administration will have many other domestic issues to deal with. It's not clear whether they will control the Senate or not. It's not clear they'll get their agenda through, and he wants to put Iran really sort of front and center. So this is a way of calling attention to it, calling attention to Iran's, if you like, what he would term adversarial regional role. And I think the other aspect of what's going on is to sort of heighten the tensions, because the main reason, I think, for the visit to Saudi Arabia was to agree, if you like, an agenda with the Saudis about Iran. Where are we going to stand in Iran?
So this character, Tony Blinken, has previously said about, talked about regime change in Syria and the renewal of that. But right. You expect this is very much because of Blinken and Biden's support for the JCPOA nuclear agreement with Iran, some type of attempt at forestalling a resumption of that agreement?
Yes, I think what they were doing is, you know, you have at one end of the sort of spectrum, you've got Obama's sort of project. And then at the other end, you have the 12 conditions, maximalist conditions laid down by Pompeo. And I guess the fear in Israel and in Saudi Arabia that it will be closer to the end of the spectrum, closer to the Obama with few changes, sunset clauses and other things like this. Whereas Netanyahu probably wants it as close as possible to the maximalist position that Pompeo laid out in its in his conditionality for talks with Iran or engaging with Iran. And somewhere in between the two, they'll hope to meet. But I think actually it's unlikely they will meet. I think what they were doing in Saudi Arabia was fixing a very tough agenda for the United States negotiators, if there are negotiations with Iran. Iran has said very clearly that it's not going to negotiate at all until America comes back into compliance with the JCPOA. And Zarif said the only way to do that is they've got to come in line with the Security Council Resolution 2231, which folds into it, if you like, that JCPOA text. So he says, if you can come in with that, and B, get rid of all of the sanctions. All of the adverse things have happened since. You can do it through executive orders. Then maybe we can talk. But I think that speech by Zarif met a certain degree of criticism back in Iran for saying that. Zarif is an old friend of Biden, knows him quite well from his time when he was in New York, and feels there's a personal chemistry. But I don't think that that's really likely to take it very far. And at the moment, Washington is putting on new sanctions. They promise sanctions every week. But what's different, what's important about these sanctions is that these are not sanctions on the nuclear issues. These are Magnitsky-type sanctions, i.e. sanctions dealing with human rights violations and other matters, but not the nuclear issues.
Of course, so by sanctions by the Trump administration. Of course, Donald Trump of course, believes he won the election. But so who is going to win? And just explain. So, are Israel? Should we believe Israel when it says that it's destroying Iranian targets in Syria? And why has there been no so-called mainstream media reporting of airstrikes on the capital city of a major country in the Middle East?
Well, mainstream reporting these days is rather sort of rather eccentric, certainly in terms of the United States. I mean, large elements of what's happening in the world are just not reported at all.
There's nothing for the BBC here in Britain either.
No, I know, but they're all following this agenda of a Biden win and coming in, and it's going to be, back to the ancien régime. But I think that actually what's happening with Iran is that Biden is overbidding. He's asking for too much from this. He's saying he wants to bring in all of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. Israel must be in agreement with it. The Israeli ambassador said there can't be an agreement unless Israel is at the table. They want to get rid of the sunset clauses. They want to change other aspects of it. I'm not sure that Iran will do this. They've made it very clear they don't want to. And what's changed is Iran has new options. There's Russia and China. The more that the American administration of Mr. Trump attacked China and Russia, the closer that has brought them to Iran. Iran is pivotal in the planning both of Russia and of China. And China has been investing large resources in Iran, quietly, but substantial resources on railway lines and on port reestablishment, refurbishing an oil field and so on. So I think, Iran can look east. It doesn't have to look to America. At this very time, China has just opened a new market in the north, the regional economic partnership, with 2.2 billion people, 1/3 of global GNP. I mean, a market that's bigger than the European Union.
So you really think that the threat of so-called third party, arguably illegal U.S. sanctions just doesn't work anymore, threatening companies that do trade with Washington and NATO's perceived enemies?
Oh, it works with some European companies. I mean, look what's happened to the European attempts to try and get some sort of arrangement for trade with Iran. Certainly all of the banks and European insurance companies get frightened by the threat of American sanctions. But the world is a very different place from 4 years ago. America is not seen as a natural vision. I know that Biden talks, and Blinken, by the way, always says, his favorite catchphrase has always been, the world is very bad at self-organizing. That's why America has to organize it for it. And I don't think those days exist still. I don't think Russia, China, and the rest of the world are just waiting for direction for, as Biden said, to take their seat at the top of the table, and to give it the instructions for the world. They see what's happened during this election. They see that the American polity is hopelessly divided. They see the economic and financial crisis that is taking place. Even as the stock market is soaring, they know that this is not a good place to be. Iran is not, if you like, cornered in this respect, and does have now other things. And will it give up its sovereignty, which would be certainly the sort of sum total of the demands that would be made by Washington? I mean, you know, this will be redolent of Saddam Hussein's, you know, the Americans insisting that they had to inspect his bedroom and his bathroom.
Obviously, Blinken has previous on this because he was part of the destruction of Africa's richest per capita country, Libya.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're not lucky enough to be Iranian, as it were, what happens if you are against Israeli violations of UN Security Council resolutions? I mean, Hezbollah MPs, democratically elected Hezbollah MPs in Beirut, I know you used to live in Beirut, they are sanctioned by the European Union. Any change for Hezbollah or, I mean, even for normal activists who support Palestine? Apparently Blinken says that BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign is anti-Semitic.
Yes, I think they're going to put that into legislation. No, I don't think so. I think Biden is a Zionist. He's always been a Zionist. Blinken is, his parentage is Jewish. His stepfather was a Holocaust survivor. I don't think we're going to see much change. And in fact, in Israel, they're almost sort of welcoming it, because one person summed it up in this way, and he said, look, you know, Obama, he was just too rational. He didn't have the feel for the region at all. Whereas, in their view, Biden and Kamala Harris, who both are ardent Zionists, they feel our emotions. They understand our emotions. The emotional landscape will be much better for Israel and quite different than it was under Obama. So I don't think we should look for any big changes. I very much regret, and it gives me no pleasure in saying it, but I can't see. I mean, I know the Palestinian Authority has now gone back into security coordination with Israel and said they'll review payments to prisoners' families and things like that. But, you know, the reality is there's no peace party in Israel. If something happened to Netanyahu, there wouldn't be a peace party. It would be more likely to be the hard right, the Orthodox and the far right in Israel, that will, if not will not be in power, but will be the, if you like, the key swing voters in any future political setup in Israel. So it's moved far to the right. No one is thinking of a political solution from the Palestinians within Israel at the moment. And the Palestinians really have few cards which to play. The Gulf states have now shifted. Saudi Arabia will sooner or later, I guess. And Europe just doesn't have, I think, the will to play this. They're too excited with Biden's election and dreaming that it's all going to be a return to the good old Atlanticism of the past. I think they're mistaken.
Alistair Crook, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
After the break, as a fire kills 10 with coronavirus at an intensive care unit in NATO member Romania, what is the level of neoliberal corruption in the former Moscow-aligned state? The director of Oscar-tipped film Collective about Romania's previous worst fire tells us about profit-driven corruption that echoes testimony heard this week about Britain's worst tower inferno, austerity emblem, Grenfell. All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground.